Hey team, it's Katie here, and welcome to the Kick It with Katie podcast. Today's episode, I am going to be going over the where do I start my kid off in soccer? So, first things first, start at home. So, start introducing soccer and the game at home. That is a very easy and cheap way to get your kid interested in the sport. Watching soccer, playing pass with them in the yard, teaching them how to juggle. Now, if you have no experience with soccer, these are also moments that you'll be able to make a fool of yourself in front of your kid, but also while learning and spending time with them, teaching them the game, you learning the game, things like that. So that is a very easy option. Low cost, because maybe you just need to go out and buy a ball and then you guys can pass back and forth, things like that. So easy way. First thing, start at home. And even once you continue on to the other options, keep soccer at home an option with your kid, as far as playing with them, practicing with them, watching them practice. Those are moments that they will remember and that you will definitely cherish. But that's a super easy thing to do, is just starting at home. The next option as far as soccer is recreation. So big way to introduce kids into soccer is a recreation program. I will be speaking from my experience in my area. I assume other areas it will be very similar, but depending on your location, if you're in a rural community, an inner city community, options are probably going to be a lot different. But these are the basic main things for me to say. These are ways for you to introduce your kid into the sport. So the recreation option. Now, great option, cheap option, but you get what you pay for. So you have to remember that when you sign your kid up for a recreation program, is a lot of times this is 100% volunteer basis for the coaches. They're not getting compensated. They're volunteering their time to be with your kids and teach your kids. And the quality of the coaches is going to be low. A lot of times you're not going to get a coach who has any sort of coaching licensing credentials, or maybe no experience playing the game. As the game has grown in the United States, the odds of somebody having previous playing experience has definitely been greater, but a lot of times those people are automatically just putting their kids into a competitive environment if that is what they did. Now, we started our kids off in rec programs. I think the only one of our kids that didn't play recreation was our twins. Everybody else did recreation for at least 6 months, if not longer. And one of us, either myself, my husband, or my brother-in-law, was involved in one of the teams in some way, as far as coaching or helping coach. And we tried to get our kids on recreation teams with people that we knew, so that way we sort of knew the level of commitment and experience from people, either the parents or possibly the kids, as far as what their level of commitment and experience with sports in general was going to be, and what their expectations of the rec program were going to be for that team. When you go into a rec program, a lot of times they usually do one practice a week plus one game per week. And usually it's like 8 games. So it runs over the course of 2 to 2.5 months. In my local area, they give different days of the week that they can have options for certain age groups for games, based on field availability. So Saturday leagues usually go pretty fast for games and teams signups. And then usually there's 1, maybe 2 other options for that same age group on a weekday. And so I think one of our kids did games on like a Thursday night one time, or maybe a Wednesday, and then they practiced on like Monday or something like that. So it really just depends on what the options and availabilities are. So the recreation programs in my area, most of the cities do some sort of a recreation program. So that way it's just people in the same community go to the local city parks on weekdays or whenever, and they have a specific time that they can practice at the fields, and then they have their game days at those same fields typically. Excuse me. So that's kind of what those options are. There's also some clubs in our area, and I don't know if it's different in other states. Maybe it's more common this way than the city way. I have no idea. I've only ever lived in Utah, so I don't know. Please tell me what the options are as far as recreation programs go. If you're in a different state, I would love to hear about it. But there are also some clubs who have done, some have done them and they've done away with them because the cities were more popular, and so the club aspect of it dwindled away. But there are a couple still that I know of, not very many, but there are a couple of competitive clubs who do a recreation program as well. So they have both options. So like my daughter's gymnastics place that they go to, they have a recreation program, or they have a competitive program. A lot of dance studios that I've seen as well, now they offer a recreation program, and then they offer the competitive side as well that competes and stuff like that. So there are a few in our area that offer both. You can either be part of the rec program or you can be part of their competitive program. So like I said, the majority of the rec programs are run by cities in my area. I have participated in the city-run ones. Some leagues are better than others, so sometimes you have to do your research on what you're looking for. But a lot of people just do the leagues of the cities that they're currently in. As far as I know, there's not any restrictions. As far as like, I think if you live outside of the city that you're doing the rec program in, I think you have to pay like $5 extra or something like that, but it's not an excessive amount of money. But anyway, so those are the options in my area as far as recreation programs. Again, you have to remember that these are all volunteers. So, there's usually not referees at the younger ages. I'm assuming once they go older ages, I've only ever done the rec programs at the younger ages where they're like 5v5 or 4v4 or something like that, small fields. I've never done them at the older ages where they can do throw-ins and things like that. So I'm not sure how those work because I've never done it. But I do know that in some of the areas, even the referees aren't actual like licensed referees. They're just volunteers that want to get paid, and they know the most of the rules of the game, like the basic rules of the game, but they're not actual certified referees, as far as I'm aware. But anyway, so that's your recreation option. Now, the recreation programs are not there to develop your players. They're not there to teach them a lot of skill unless you get that needle in the haystack where there's a random, competitive coach like I said, me, my husband, my brother-in-law, a couple other people that we know that are, their kids started out in a rec program, and so they did help. So those teams probably got a little bit more out of the soccer program that they were in versus being on a competitive team or being on a team with just a literal parent volunteer that didn't know anything about soccer. They've never experienced it. So if you happen to be one of those people who does a rec program and they're calling for volunteers, you can definitely volunteer, and there are a lot of resources for people out there who are going to be helping with a recreation program, coaching a team, things like that. Key thing for me the advice that I could give to somebody who's going to volunteer as a recreation coach is just make sure the kids have a ball at their feet and they stay engaged. And don't make the practices be more than an hour especially if they're the younger ages. 30 to 45 minutes at best is what you're going to get their attention spans out of them. So just make sure that the kids all have a ball at their feet and they just dribble the whole time. I mean, that's my advice. Just mask it in different games, races, different things like that. So making sure that it's fun. One of the easy things that we do, super, super easy, requires nothing except for the kids to have a soccer ball at their feet, is just dribbling around and then stopping and telling them, put the ball on your head or sit on the ball or lay down on the ball or, something kind of silly. So you're doing the actual work and then you throw something a little bit out there that's a little bit crazy that they might think is silly, keeping them engaged. And what is he going to do next or she going to do next? What's going to be the next thing? And anyway, so those are some fun things that you can do. Super easy, super basic, to keep the kids engaged and just really getting them working on those basic skills. And at the younger ages, it's really just dribbling. Don't bother on trying to teach them how to pass the ball, because the concept of them knowing why they need to be passing, they probably can't process it, especially at the recreation level, where the level of ability is going to be a very different than it when you go to like a competitive team. There's still going to be a level of ability difference on competitive teams, but a lot of times people don't move their kids over to a competitive program unless they know that the ability is there. Okay, so for the recreation programs, usually they run 2 to 3 times a year, depending on where you are. Maybe there's an indoor option as well. We have an indoor option here, super hard to get into, so you got to sign up early. But that is an option as far as the recreation level goes for recreation programs. And then moving over into the competitive level, do your research. So if you're going to make the jump from recreation to competitive, just do your research on the programs in your area, the different clubs, the different levels of competitive clubs and teams that are in the area. What's their history? What's the coach's history? And make sure, again, just do your research. It's all about doing the research. So my home state, Utah, we have just a basic website where it's just utahyouthsoccer.net, and you can go and find all of the registered competitive clubs in our state are listed on that website. And they're broken down by different regions or areas. So like if you live in Salt Lake Valley, it will give you I don't know, this is just a number I'm throwing out there, the 10 soccer clubs in the valley and what your options are there. And then do your research. So on the website for our state, it gives you your area and it lists out all the clubs, and then usually it has a link to their website, the club's website, and then you can do your research from there. Our club has a list of all the coaches in each age group, and so you can contact them usually via email or text message. I don't know what's on the website. I can't remember. I know email is on there for sure. You can email the coach if you don't know which age group your kid falls in. Right now it's based on birth year. Find the coach that reaches your kid or is over your kid's birth year. Email them if it's not during tryout seasons. Even if it is near tryout season, email them and say, hey, we're interested. Can we come to a couple practices if you have room? Things like that. Don't be afraid to reach out to the coaches and the clubs to get a feel for what it is. Ask all of the questions. How often do you practice? Where do you practice? What times do you practice? What is your level of expectation? How often do you play games? Where do you play games? Because some people and teams travel more than others. The league that my older team is in right now, we have to travel a little bit further to play some teams versus my younger daughter's teams, where they are pretty much locally in the valley. Occasionally we'll have to travel to up to Park City or out to Tooele to play some games, but for the most part, it's usually somewhere in the same area where we practice is where the games are. It's a very central area, but occasionally we'll have to travel a little bit. But my older daughter's team, we had to travel an hour plus to get to some of our games this past fall and spring season. So it really just depends what level you're at, what age group they're in, what division they're in, different things like that. So make sure you ask all those questions. And then our club has listed on their club fees, cost for uniforms, different things like that, what's included in breakdowns of things like that. So it should all be listed out. If the club doesn't list it out, I would definitely say, hey, what are the payments for the expectations of what's going on where and different things like that. So ask all of those questions, do your research, and just make sure you find something that fits for you. Hopefully you find a great coach that is able to be a great mentor and coach for your kid. And that is kind of really the options that I'm seeing. There are some other random options where, like an indoor season for us, maybe the recreation programs that do indoor are all full, and we do have several indoor facilities that sometimes you can do, like, hey, a player is looking for a team for this age, because some teams maybe take the winter off, and so these players want to keep playing, and maybe a different team can have them come and play with their team, or they can create a team. I've had girls play on a team with their friends before, so it really kind of just depends on what the options are. I play year round, basically play and train year round, so my teams, we are taking November and December off from games, but we're still training, and then we'll pick up with indoor and futsal starting in the new year, and then we'll do that for a couple of months, do some tournaments, and then go into our spring season and then tryouts at the end of the spring season. So that's kind of, the outline. I would, if somebody's reaching out to me right now, what are the expectations and what does the rest of the year look like? That's what I would tell them. We're training this many times a week, indoor, and then we're going to be starting indoor and futsal, and then we're going to try and do one, maybe two out of state tournaments, and then go into our spring season. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. Now, if you miss tryouts, let's say your kid played summer and fall rec soccer, and they missed tryouts that were in the spring or the summer, and you're going, my kid was really good, they were a standout player in the rec program, I want them to learn more, I want them to develop their skills more. Now, even though it's the middle of the season, the middle of the year for most clubs and things like that, go ahead and reach out to those clubs and see if they have availability. And if they don't, ask them if they have a recommendation of another club. If they say no, they don't have a recommendation, then you're going to have to do the research on your own. But like, I know a few of the other coaches in my age group in the same area. So if my team was full, I would say, hey, I would, you could give this person a try, or I would reach out to a coach and say, hey, I have somebody that's looking. Is your team full? Do you have space? Depending on the level of friendship I have with the coach, whether their number's in my phone or not. But anyway, so always, keeping that open line of communication there. But don't be afraid to reach out just because it's the middle of the year and you don't want to wait another 6 months until the next tryout, because that's 6 months of training and games that they could be getting at a higher level if that's what you're ready to do and to commit to. Now, going from recreation to competitive or travel soccer is going to be a huge jump with your commitment level. Recreation soccer, it's you sign up and you can show up if you want or not. Like, coaches are obviously going to recommend that you be there because they're volunteering their time, but it's not like you have to be there. Everybody should be getting to play in the rec space. So if you just show up to games, it won't be as great for your kid because they're not interacting with their team more. They're not getting out of their comfort zone. They may not know what's going on as far as the team. They don't get to know the other kids as well. So definitely going to practices is something I feel like you should be doing because you signed up for it. So you should just be expecting it. But again, it's a fully volunteer basis. So, missing some practices isn't going to be as big of a deal at the rec level versus when you miss a couple of practices at the competitive level. So, and sometimes with the competitive level, a kid gets injured, still have the kid go to practices because they're still there with the environment. They're still learning visually, even if they can't physically do it based on, depending on what their injury is, but still keep them going if it's possible for them to keep going because they can still learn. I had a girl who was at my practice the other night. She had rolled her ankle. So I had her kind of be my assistant coach for the practice. I had her sorting penny colors for exercises we were doing. I had her, give me cones, or I had her go place things in certain areas. I had her help me set up some things. So she was still involved, even though she couldn't actually physically play in the game because she had sprained her ankle. So she was still recovering from that. So it really just depends what you're able to do. But when a kid misses rec practice versus competitive practice, the repercussions aren't as great. Whereas if a kid misses consistently a lot of their competitive team practices, they're going to continue falling behind most likely because they're not there with their team, learning the skills, honing their skills and things like that, depending on what the situation is. Now, if they're sick and they miss, it may take them a little bit of time to get back up to the speed where they were before they were sick, depending on what the illness is or things like that. Same thing with an injury. If they miss practices physically, it's going to take them a little bit because they're going to be a little bit out of shape because they haven't been able to run, things like that. If they had some sort of a sickness and, it affects their respiratory, it's going to take them a little bit of a minute to get back into the shape of things. And coaches should know that, it takes time for them to recover. So it's something that parents need to remember as well, that kids aren't always going to be able to bounce back from where they were before they got sick or injured. It's going to take time. So you need to make sure you give them that time. And I'm sure that their coach will give them that time as well. Just make sure you communicate with them because it's not going to be just hey, I was sick for, 3-4 days. I had, a cold or sore throat or whatever it might be, the flu, and then they're not going to be the same person that they were. It's going to take them, a week, maybe 2 weeks to get back up to where they were before they got sick or injured or something like that. So give them that space. But again, it's not the same thing as if like a kid is maybe they have piano lessons at the same time that their practices on one day a week. And so they're only going to one out of the 2 practices per week for their comp team. So they're not getting as much consistent training as the rest of their team. So they might still be able to stay up mostly, but those other kids are getting 50% more out of their practices than your child is. So make sure you know what the commitment level is, what your expectations are for your kids, so that way you can maximize on their development and learning and their abilities and things like that. And then, if they have to miss for something, see if there's an optional other training that they can go to. Hey, I have to miss this practice. Can we come to a different practice? Maybe the coach coaches more than one team or something like that. So those are your options there. And then there's the indoor stuff where I said that I kind of went off on a tangent, but the indoor programs and, whether or not your comp team does indoor and things like that. So again, that's something that you need to do your research on. How often do they train? Do they take the winter off? What's the expectation there? Do they travel? Do some people, do they play on Sundays? For some people, that's an issue, as far as their religious beliefs and what they, whether or not they're willing to play on Sundays. I know that in some other states, because here in Utah, we don't have games on Sundays usually. Sometimes we do, but for the most part, we don't. Our games are primarily on Saturdays or a weekday. But in other states, a lot of times their game days are on Sundays or Saturdays and Sundays. And so they have those 2 days. And so that's when their league games are on the weekends, and then they train during the week. So depending on where you are, what your abilities are and things like that, what your commitment level is, just do your research. It's always the big thing. And a lot of times people will just turn to Facebook groups and say, hey, I'm in this area. What are some teams that you guys can recommend? And I can say take those recommendations with a grain of salt, but again, do your own research. You can ask them follow-up questions. Say, what makes you like this club? What has impressed you about this coach? Different things like that. So get a feel for the parents, what their experiences have been and things like that. So don't just say, hey, this person that I've never met before that is behind a keyboard, a person I've never met, and they're recommending this place because I just moved here. But do your research, are there other clubs in the area? What's the history of the clubs? How long have they been around? I know that in my state, new clubs have been popping up, a lot lately. A lot of times it's coaches leaving clubs and starting their own thing because they want to try something else. So you really just have to do your research and know the history behind it, because I would hate for somebody to sign up for a club that maybe is in its infancy. And I get you want to be part of the ground floor working in there, but sometimes those clubs don't last because they don't have the history as much as the other clubs, and so they just fall apart because they're so new that people don't want to go to them because they're risky. So if that's something that you're interested in because maybe it's more cost effective, just know what you're getting into, because it may sound great and amazing, but there's no track record for you to understand what they're going to provide your kid because it's brand new. So that's always a risky thing. If it's a coach, maybe that's been at a different club and they're starting their own thing and the coach has a great track record, then that might be a different story. But if it's a brand new person starting a brand new program, you may not know what you're getting into. So be wary of those. But I'm not saying you don't do it. I'm just saying be careful, because, if you're in it for the longevity of it, it may not go long term. I would hope that it does, because I hate it when a kid is on a team and then it just dissolves because of these other factors that the kids don't understand, and then they're no longer with their teammates. So that always stinks. But yeah, just remember all of that information. I mean, it's a lot of stuff to take in, so I get it. But do your research, ask a lot of questions, take your time. If somebody's making you 100% commit right now before you've seen it or anything, I would just walk away. Huge red flag for me. I would definitely want to go to at least one practice, if not 2 or 3, before I commit to something if I'm not able to be at tryouts. Tryouts is a whole different thing. A lot of times coaches will open up their practices before tryouts so that people kind of get a feel for it before that tryout actually comes. But ask your questions, do your research before you commit to something, because it does cost a lot of money. And so it really sucks when people, shell out money for their kid to play on a team and then they can't commit fully to the program, or maybe they literally got lied to, which I hope doesn't happen, but it doesn't happen a lot. I know it has happened where they do get lied to, and what the coach or the administrator tells them is what was going to be provided, and then they get, bait and switch. It's something totally different. It's not as competitive as they said it was going to be, or it's way more competitive than they said it was going to be. So just, do your research, ask all the questions, do what you can, and then choose the program that's right for you. And again, it really sucks for people to club hop. I saw a reel the other day about a person who was had all of the sweatshirts that they've bought for their kids' team, and they've been to like 6 different clubs in a state. And it's like, how old is your kid? And why have you been to so many clubs? Like, you know, red flag for me for those people if they've been to that many clubs. But, you know, maybe there's a legitimate reason. Maybe they've moved, or maybe the coaches quit, or there were other outside factors, and maybe that's the reason why. But that does, you know, show me that you guys have like a commitment issue, or maybe nothing's ever good enough for you, or you think your kid is better than they actually are. So definitely, you know the level of your kid. You would be surprised at the amount of people who will email coaches and say, my kid was the best player on this team and blah, 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 blah. And then they come try out for a team. And then they are like, oh my gosh, this team is way better. Very rarely is it actually, like, honestly the truth that their kid was actually as good as they said that they were. So parents, be realistic about your kid. Where do you see them falling in the game? And hopefully they're somewhere in the middle of the pack. They're still being challenged, that type of thing. But when you're reaching out, maybe don't say, hey, my kid is the best. Just say, hey, my kid wants to try your team. Can we come, give it a try, that type of a thing. So, you don't want to put that expectation on your kid that they have to be the best, because that would also be awful if they're like, my parents think that I'm this great soccer player, and they have all this weight on their shoulders, and then they end up not being, what their parents thought, and then they just quit because the parents have this higher expectation than what the kid can give, and the kids don't want to disappoint their parents by not being that great, and so they'll just quit because they don't want to disappoint their parents that they're not as good as they are, and they'll just say, hey, I don't like it now. I'm just going to quit, because my parents are putting too much pressure on me. So anyway, a lot of things to cover in here. I've got a lot of other topics that I want to cover, but today was really just the introduction. Where do I start with my kid? The other thing was, and I can't remember if I mentioned this or not, I was doing a recording and it stopped recording after I think I had already been talking for 20 minutes, and then it stopped. And so I have no idea where it stopped recording, where I was talking. So I just started over. But for toddler ages, like kids that just learn to walk, a little bit older, preschool ages, there are the Tiny Tots programs or the Tiny Troops. I did an episode with Amy Schweizer, her Tiny Troops Tiny Troop soccer that she does, that's in several places. So there are some, not necessarily, they don't play games, but it's just teaching skills, teaching them how to walk and run and kick the ball, dribble, those types of classes that you can get into. So soccer shots, soccer tots, Tiny Troop Soccer. So look into those programs if you're interested in those. Maybe you want to do something like that in conjunction with preschool or something if you're in the United States and you do preschool, that type of a thing. So those are some fun things to introduce that into your kids' lives, so that way they can interact with other kids and do something fun and start learning those skills. But anyway, so this was my big takeaways. Just remember, there is the recreation option, but you're going to get what you pay for. So remember that it's a lot of volunteering, and you're not going to get a lot of hardcore soccer skills learned. So remember that when you're signing up for the rec programs, and then the competitive soccer leagues. And there are different leagues and tiers, and I am going to be going into that into a different episode, as far as the age groups and the formats of play and the number of players on teams and different things like that. So we're going to be delving into that kind of stuff. So I will be still doing interviews. I've talked about this before. I just wanted to get a little bit more information out there as far as youth soccer in the United States, not just the experiences of others. So hopefully this information will help you. If you have any other information as far as rec leagues in your area, I know that recreation programs in different areas may look a little bit different. So I would like to hear from you guys in the comments, either on Instagram, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, and a a review or something. Let me know what types of recreation programs you guys have out there, because I am not familiar with them. And I know other people in other places, everybody listening is not. I have more listeners outside of the state of Utah than I do inside the state of Utah, even though I'm from Utah, but most of my listenership is actually outside of my home state, which is great. I love it. And so I would love to hear what it's like outside of Utah and what the recreation programs look outside of the state of Utah, because I am only familiar with what I've been a part of and what I know. So I would love to hear what the recreation programs are like in your state. Are they affiliated with clubs? Are they put on by your cities? Is it both? Is there a little bit more competitive rec leagues than just like a basic rec league? Like, how are they run? I would love more information on that, and I can definitely share some feedback with people if they want to hear about that. But anyway, so thank you guys for listening. Look forward to the next episode. If you have a topic that you specifically want me to cover as far as youth soccer, please shoot me an email, a DM on Instagram. The links are in the show notes, but just let me know if there is a topic that you would like to cover. If there's a specific topic that I think I know somebody knows more than I do about that topic, I will have them on to help me dive into that. I tried to get somebody on with me today to go over this, but it was a pretty basic one. There's really not a lot of different options that I'm aware of. So if you have other options out there other than rec programs or just straight to competitive, let me know what it is. I know that some people that I've talked to, they have a rec program, they do travel soccer, and then they have competitive. And so I don't know if travel soccer is different than competitive, because where I am, it's the same thing. So let me know what the distinction is there. Anyway, thank you guys for listening today. Thanks for kicking it with me, and have a great day. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at kickitwithkatie_podcast _ between all the words. You can reach out to me with questions at kickitwithkatiepod@gmail.com. I also have a feature with SpeakPipe where you can leave me your own voicemail message if you want to be featured on the podcast. Rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.